I see Steve. There's David.
I'll take it. I really will.
Michael.
I like seeing when peace comes and say they came from me. I don't even care if it's true. I just want them to see it.
Sit down. Gavel it in.
Not yet, but once you handles it.
Okay. Well, I grabbed. Oh, it's still. But I can tell.
I'm giving you the answers. Yeah, I'm not giving them another one today.
I had to reach first, but and it just
And it's, well, no, and
I knew Martin was no questions.
it made,
Well, so it
keep that one today.
not embarrassing. So I'll share the story sometime.
We'll call the June 14, 2019 Governance and Policy Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents to order. We've got a good agenda today, quite a few discussion items. And before we start, I just want to say before we go into the reorganization, I want to thank Regent Beeson, who has been the vice chair of this committee for the past 2 years, for his colleagueship, his mentorship, and just a enjoyable time working on this committee and talking about some of these important governance issues that we've addressed over these last couple of years. So Regent Beeson, thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Likewise.
And we will move into the agenda. The first item is the update on administrative policy alignment review. I turn that over to Jason Langworthy, Board Associate Policy and Committees, and Director Michelle Krause, University Policy Program. Take it away, panel.
Chair Rocha, members of the committee, good morning. We're here to give you an update on the Administrative Policy Alignment Review. And to start, just to remind everyone what the University Policy Framework Hierarchy looks like. So we'll start with that. Then I'll give you a little bit of background of why this alignment was put in place by the board. And then my colleague, Michelle Krause, will take over and talk to you about the review itself. So the University Policy Framework Hierarchy that you see before you is built around and in various layers in order to give policy and direction to the institution. At the top is the charter, which was adopted by the territorial legislature in 1851 and then perpetuated by the Minnesota Constitution in 1858. From there, the board has a set of bylaws which were first adopted in 1889 and most recently updated this past October. And those bylaws define officers of the board, the election of officers, meetings, types of committees, rules of procedure, delegations of authority, and the requirement for a code of ethics, which we'll be discussing a little bit later. So those bylaws give a lot of the structure for the way that the board functions. And then further, we have board policy, which is indicated by board there under bylaws. There are currently 90 Board of Regents policies. These are the overarching policies for the system. They're sort of the umbrella policies. They're the way that the board, that you give direction to the president and to the administration in order to carry out the mission and vision that you have set for the institution. And they vary in topic and range and length and complexity. From there, Board of Regents policy, board policy development, or the policy on policies, so to speak, creates other university policies. And from there, below board, you'll see administrative, campus, college, and department. So administrative policy, there are about 199 currently. And again, these are system-wide policies that help to implement board policy. They provide procedures or a structure for areas that have been completely delegated to the administration and the president. Or in some instances, they are in response to the need for policies around sponsored research that require specific provisions. And you can see that's why we have the governmental sort of on the side of the triangle there. There is some governmental influence. That's a great example. Something like the open meeting law certainly influences board policy and our bylaws. So there is influence from other governmental agency that you can see within some of those policies. From there, we go to campus-specific policies. So there are policies for each campus that might depend on the specific campus and given the range of campuses that we have, and then policies for college and department. The important thing to remember is that all policies below board policy must be in alignment with board policy. So board policy, if there's a conflict, board policy controls. So in May of 2017, this committee did a comprehensive review of board policy development, and there were questions raised regarding alignment between board policy and all of the other university policies. How does the board know, and how is the board assured that these policies are in alignment? Now, certainly before that, this would be maybe revealed in an internal audit, but this was a proactive way of the board instructing the president that there should be a mechanism in place that's regularly reviewing these other university policies for policy alignment. So that was put in place in May of 2017. And then, with your permission, Chair Rocha, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Michelle Krause, who will talk about the mechanism that has since been put in place.
Director Gross, please.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, members of the board. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I have been the administrator for the Administrative Policy Development Unit, or the University Policy Program, for about 12 years now. We made radical changes or significant changes to processes at that point in time. Part of that is the forms that we have. So when Mr. Langworthy talks about processes and how do we ensure alignment, one of the things that we have embedded in our forms is a question for policy owners that says, is this in alignment with board policy, delegations of authority, and other administrative policies? So that's just one of the ways in which we ensure that. That comes up every time we do a comprehensive review or whenever a new policy is developed. But after this new requirement was in place, I am the delegate for this particular task, and I looked at the 199 administrative policies we have in place today. 88 of them have either a direct connection, conflict of interest is a perfect example, where there's a partnering administrative policy and a board policy on that particular topic, or some that are indirectly related, so it just touches on the side of it. We wanted to make sure that I looked at everything that really did have a connection. And those are university-wide policies, so the ones that cover every campus in the system, or Twin Cities campus, because the process we use for policy development, administrative policy development, is applied the same for the Twin Cities campus. We didn't want to have a second process, or ones that direct multiple system campuses. So we really did capture a large number. Once this is done, so once I communicate the findings to you, I'm going to kick into the phase 2. So there are the campus-specific policies that Mr. Langworthy talked about, and I also have connections with the colleges and their local policies. So I will do the same kind of review with those to make sure there's alignment not only with board policy, but also with administrative policy. And our policy on policy, not to be outdone by the board, also states the same thing. It must be equal to or more restrictive than a governing policy, and the board is the top of our governing policies. So I found 4 things that I want to share with you today. You have a Board of Regents policy called Honors, Awards, Honors, and Recognition, and you made a major change in 2016 to remove those awards that are not directly given by the board. There's a vast number of awards that were listed in that prior policy version, but it was reduced down to the ones that are actually given by the Board of Regents, and added at that time a new clause that said the president or delegate will ensure that the administrative policy covers the rest of those awards that are given. The maintenance of status quo order was in place at that time, did not come off until October 2017, and there were really limited changes to administrative policies during that time period that affected the audience covered by the maintenance of status quo order. So now that that's done, we will update the matching administrative policy. We have one on education awards that will need to be expanded, and that will be taken care of by the Provost's office in fiscal year 20.
Thank you.
The second one has to do with employee development, education, and training. Actually, this board policy prior to 2006, under faculty development, which carried sabbatical leaves, was single. There were actually 3 leave policies, and the Regents scholarship policy, and they were folded into one in 2006, so that it was under the broader umbrella now of employee development, education, and training. The current board policy provides for sabbatical leave of up to 1 year. The current administrative policy says 5.5 months for a single semester or 11 months for 2 semesters. And so Jason and I did some digging in older versions and found that in that prior to 2006 board policy version, it said the same thing that the administrative policy says today. So it said single semester 5.5 months, it said 2 semesters 11 months. The challenge was when the board policy changed to the up to 1 year, the administrative policy did not. So we do have a misalignment and the time frame as stated in those two policies. And the Office of the Executive Vice President and Provost will take care of revising that administrative policy in fiscal year 20 to make sure we get that timeline aligned. This one will probably be a quicker, faster fix to be able to make that alignment. At the same time we were doing this work, Jason did his own research and checked all the board policies to find out where there was a requirement for an administrative policy or procedure, as well as any other references to procedures. It might have been implied. It may not have been as direct as the president or delegate will maintain administrative policies. In the course of doing that, and I did the tie back to administrative policies, there is a gap. This one is a true gap. In the campus public art, there was a new clause added in 2010 that said that the president shall maintain an administrative policy and procedures to guide decision-making in this area, and no administrative policy was created at that time. I understand one was started, but it never got through the entire process. So again, the Office of the EVPP will, and University Services, because they are partners in this particular topic, will make sure that that policy is created and published in fiscal year 20. The last one is more unique. We don't know that we have a misalignment or a gap. We have a title difference. But in academic misconduct, there is a partner policy in the administrative policies called research misconduct. It carries all the same language that you have in board policy. So it does talk about the responsible conduct of research. It covers scholarly and artistic activities. But in 2012, that matching administrative policy was relabeled to research misconduct. The focus of that policy really was much like the board policy on the research side of the house. The procedures were covering what would happen if research misconduct was alleged. How would that be addressed? How would investigations occur? And it's been that way for a very long time. The only thing that significantly changed in 2012 that might look like it's out of alignment is actually just the title change, but the same scope is covered in there. That said, this is an opportunity for a group, and the Provost's office has offered to convene a group, including the Office of the Vice President for Research, to make sure we don't have any gap. We do have an overarching misconduct policy. It's called reporting suspected misconduct. And that is broad enough to cover every type of misconduct that could be reported here at the University of Minnesota. And the tool that we use for anonymous reporting also supports misconduct reporting across the board. And there is a category for academic misconduct. So we have a lot of coverage in this area, but that working group will go back and look and make sure we truly do not have any gaps or if there's any enhancements that could be made. So they've agreed to make that commitment in fiscal year 20 as well.
Thank you. First, appreciate the critical work that you do in this area. This is an enormous enterprise with many campuses and departments, and when you, as Mr. Langworthy walked us through, it starts from these foundational documents and then grows from there, and it's so easy over time, as you just identified, for the left hand to be doing one thing and the right hand, not necessarily knowing. You end up with some of these differences, although I would say from a personal standpoint, I was pretty impressed that it was limited to a fairly small number of places where we saw that kind of discontinuity. Open it up for questions and comments from members of the committee. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I joined the board, I didn't really appreciate the importance of this whole policy work. And obviously, I'd see the board policies and we would deal with them. But when you have this confederation of hundreds of small businesses running around here in this far-flung empire, and you're sitting at the board of regents and you're wondering how are we supposed to ensure that which we're doing is in general alignment with what we have approved and our values. And it all comes down to policies. And I didn't even understand sort of the idea of administrative policies initially. But the fact that there's 198 sounds bureaucratic, but I think it's really good work. What I was going to ask was, if we look at the 198 administrative policies, what do you do with the outliers, the people who will not sort of bring those policies up to date? I would guess you probably get pretty good conformance with when you've as you bird dog these policies. But how do you? If we were to look at sort of the 198? Are there some that are tardy, beyond years, months?
Director Gross.
Thank you. Chair Rocha, Regent Beeson. Yes, we do have a comprehensive review cycle. It is 4 years in duration because administrative policies change more frequently, or at least certainly the procedures around them do. I monitor those all the time. On an annual basis, every senior leader gets a report on how compliant their groups are with that particular cycle. I can tell you the maintenance of status quo order certainly put those organizations that were affected by that behind, much more behind. We have quite a few of the vice presidential units that are 100%, and we have some that are not. So I give the information to the senior leaders, and then they work with their groups to get current with that. Policy owners can change their policies, frankly, at any time. They do have to go through the process. They need not wait for 4 years for a comprehensive review, and we have a very stringent process to go through a comprehensive review. We want them to look at their documents and decide whether or not a policy is even needed. That's how we've been able to keep it at 200 policies for now more than a decade, right around that range within 5 policies. But there are some that are behind, and we continue to work with those policy owners.
Regent Beeson. All right. Regent Mayron.
Just a question, if a department or a group wants to institute a new policy that there isn't one that's currently covering whatever the issue is, do they have to go through your group first in order to have you review it to make sure that at least at some level it appears in compliance or not inconsistent with policies that are more senior to that particular policy?
Director Gross.
Thank you. Chair Rocha, Regent Mayron. That's a great question. There's very little I can do at the departmental level. There's so many departments here at the university. If they call me, and with my 4 decades of experience here at the university, a lot of people do, I'm happy to look through anything that they have. The world that I manage, or my office manages, is that of administrative policies. At the campus level policies, I've worked with Crookston, and now all of their policies are in our library. And yes, I had eyes on all of those and helped format them and get them to align more with the style we use for administrative policies. I expect to work with the other campuses in the near future, and those are housed in our library as well. But at the college and the departmental level, I don't have that same visibility. When I go through and do the review, I will find out how we're doing today.
Regent Davenport. Oh, Regent Mayron.
It seems to me, well, there's 2 ways to look at policy and policy alignment, and one is after the fact and one is before it is put in effect. And I'm not here to prejudge which is a better way, but at least there would be some argument that it ought to be part of the department or the college's way of approaching new policies or even amendments to policies, that they at least go to you or your group to see if there's anything that's inconsistent and try and catch it at the front end rather than in the 4-year cycle. But I think that's for you all to decide.
Director Gross, response?
Thank you, Chair Rocha, Regent Mayron. I love it. I'm a policy wonk. You're speaking my language when you say that. It's just the sheer volume. The other challenge that we have is many units don't specify what policy is in the same way we are. So if they have a work rule that says I can begin my work at 7 a.m. in the morning, or I could have a late start, they call that a policy in a different way that I would call a work rule. So what I've seen typically at the departmental level are more of those operational work rules. Clean out the refrigerator on a weekly basis. It's the kind of guidelines that you want just to make sure the office operates responsibly. Colleges do have, though, actual policies, and so this will give visibility. I would talk to anybody about policy all day long. It's a matter of them coming to me.
Good. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. Ms. Gross, could you briefly summarize the consultation process in policy procedure?
Director Gross.
Chair Rocha, Regent Davenport. We have a very robust consultation process. It's required in our process framework. Policy owners are the heart of everything that happens in this particular area, and they are in charge of making sure that their management is in alignment with the proposed changes. Once they have a draft ready, they are required to go to the partners that might be part of that policy. Very few units operate alone. There's somebody else that's impacted from an administrative level, but then they go to their customers, whether it is a standing body that they might have. So the grants management user network under the sponsored side of the house, for example. The student side has many, many other committees that they would go to. So they consult with them and get feedback. Within the last year, we have incorporated an intentional equity lens view on our administrative policies. So that's another group that they are required to go through. Our 10 volunteers who are looking at it against our 11 underrepresented groups to see if the way we've written policies has a negative impact on any of those groups. So that's yet another one. We then have the group that I manage, which is called the Policy Advisory Committee, with one individual from every one of the vice presidential units and every system campus. We review policies. We don't want it to look like 70 people wrote the policies, because that's how many owners we have. And we do that filtering. Is there a gap? Is it readable? Are there things that could be better or duplicate? And that is all fleshed out before it ever gets to the President's Policy Committee, which are the senior leader group, who actually makes the decision on new policies, policies with significant changes, or those that are ready for retirement.
Thank you.
Chair Rocha.
Thank you. Mr. Langworthy.
And I'll just echo that there is a similar, although not identical, process for board policies. So the board policies, the board office takes care of that process as compared to the administrative policies. And we have very similar consultation process when we're going through either a comprehensive review for a board policy or an off-cycle specific change for a board policy.
Thank you. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. It's kind of brief. It's germane to the subject, although it's more personal in that I just love history. And my guess is there are retired administrative policies and things of the university, since we've been a university since 1851 or whatever. Do we have a archive of those? I think that'd be great to look through. Do we have an archive of the retired policies? And if so, is that in your office, or would someone contact like Eric Moore over at Archives?
Director Gross, you want to field this?
I can cover some of that. The Rocha, Regent Anderson, electronic versions that have been in place, and we've had a centralized electronic policy library since 1993. We take care of those. We also have some of the paper versions. We do use the university archive as well. There may be gaps, but it's not just of retired policies. It might be prior iterations that were in place. So we have all the electronic versions. We can, something called the Wayback Machine, but we do have the capability to get those to those iterations.
So,
Please, Regent Anderson.
if I just wanted to look at them for my own edifice, can I go online, or can I have to go somewhere?
Director Gross.
Chair Rocha, Regent Anderson, you'd have to come to us, or to Susan McKinney, who is the records manager for the university, make the request, and we will get those copies.
Thank you.
Regent Beeson.
Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry, Regent Beeson. Mr. Langworthy, did you want to?
Well, I mean, we're talking about archives, Chair Rocha, so I have to jump in.
This is your thing.
But yes, Regent Anderson, on the board side then, we maintain all of the various policy versions. as well as the board, since they're acted upon by the board, those policies are included in the minutes for that reason. So we can also, certainly back in the office with the bound volumes and then the big policy file, happy to show you that as well.
Sorry for the misfire. Regent Beeson.
Well, Mr. Chair, I was going to suggest to Regent Anderson, maybe President Kaler would join you on researching archived administrative policies and put that on his list of to-do as time becomes available.
President Kaler.
I can't let that pass, Chair Rocha. I'll certainly give that as much as advisement as is necessary, Regent Beeson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Further questions or comments from the committee? And we can certainly refer the policy on policies to a committee on committees if we want to take a look at that. All right, well, Director Gross, thank you so very much. This is such an important thing, and from my perspective, in the long view, this function of the university has really improved over the years, and it's at this point, I think, I would say we're among best practices nationally, and as we can see across the nation, understanding and adhering to policies is critical for organizations like the university to succeed. So thank you so much for your efforts.
Thank you, Chair Rocha, members of the board.
And thank you as well, Mr. Langworthy. We'll ask you to move into the next topic, which is the 2019 Board Policy Report. Take it away.
Chair Rocha, members of the committee, the 2019 Board Policy Report is in your docket on page 16. And the report is required by, again, Board of Regents Policy, Board Policy Development, and contains two main sections. So the first is the 2018-19 Policy Review Summary. So this is a summary of the work that's been done on board policies throughout the year. As you just heard, we have 90 Board of Regents policies. We have a comprehensive review cycle every 6 years. And the way that we manage those 90 policies is we break them into classes of between 14 to 16 policies each year. So that's often the bulk of the work that's being done to do that comprehensive review. In addition, the board at any time can take action to amend a policy in what we call an off-cycle change. If the board sees a need to do that, if the president requests the board to do that, those can take place as well. So the report before you shows those policies that were comprehensively reviewed, where no revisions were recommended. Those have also been reported to you this year as an information item in the committees that have a sort of content specific disciplines for those policies. You'll see items that have been amended by the board. There are also then, the last two section, there are some policies that are pending review, so we just kind of ran out of time this academic year, but they're slated and ready to go in the fall. And then there are other policies that still require additional review. Certainly, based on the complexity of the board policy, based on the review necessary, sometimes it takes more than one academic year to complete that. For example, when we did a comprehensive review of Board of Regents policy, board operations, and agenda guidelines, that took multiple meetings because it's a big policy and took multiple review pieces. So that was one that we did hold over for a year. But we would anticipate that those would continue the review and come forward. The next part of the report on page 17 is the 2019-20 Policy Work Plan. So when we codified the comprehensive review cycle in 2017, again, we have these, the next class of policies for comprehensive review, and that's the first part there, the first 14 policies. So we'll ask the policy implementers, which is the kind of the senior leader that oversees the board policy, to take a look at those and to review them to see if the policies are still needed, if they reflect the board's vision, if they're in alignment with best practice. The other set there you can see are the policies then that will be carried over from this academic year in 2018-19. Now this is a starting point. As I mentioned, at any time, if we need to add policies to this work plan, if we need to make specific off-cycle reviews, this is just a way for us to structure our work, but certainly policies can always be added to this. work plan. This also gives us an opportunity for you to see the work in the upcoming year. So if there are questions or concerns or items that you would like to have the policy implementers think about during that comprehensive review, we would be happy to take that feedback and then pass that along. So with that, Regent Rocha, I'm happy to take any questions if there are.
Thank you, Mr. Langworthy. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. And thank you, Board Associate Langworthy. I'm just wondering if you would maybe just quickly give a headline. Some of these are self-explanatory, but I'm not exactly sure what some of them cover. And so, for instance, appointments to organization and boards, maybe you can just give us a few bullet points on some that may not be entirely clear what they're covering.
Sure.
Mr. Langworthy.
Sure, Rocha, Regent Powell. So just to kind of walk through them very briefly, accessioning and deaccessioning of museum collections. This has to do with, how do we assess and deassess those collections across the system. Appointments to organizations and boards. There are organizations like the University of Minnesota Foundation or the Fairview Board that this board makes appointments to. So that just lays out what organizations and how that process moves forward. I think most of the other ones, you'll see the private practice plans for the School of Nursing, the medical school, both on the Duluth and the Twin Cities campus, how our faculty members can have that private practice and the parameters in which that functions. And then certainly something like the student representatives to the Board of Regents, how the student representatives function, what bodies get to appoint student representatives, and then I think most of them are fairly then self-explanatory. The other one I'll mention, the gifts received and given by Regents and university officials. That's one where we've identified maybe in the code of ethics conversation later that maybe there's the part about the region specific, maybe we want to pull that out of that policy and put it into the code of ethics so that everything involving the board is in one place and then university officials stands alone as its own policy.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Question, Mr. Langworthy. So to the extent that there are some, like, for instance, the American Indian Advisory Boards, I think we started that conversation a while ago and it's been, I think, suspended for some time. If somebody from the public wanted to know what was going on, would they have to, if a region, for instance, received an inquiry, would we go to the board office, or is there some portal where people can see where policies are in this process?
Chair Rocha, there's not a portal currently. They could certainly contact our office, and then we would work with the policy implementer, in this case, Vice President Go, to provide information regarding the status of that to that individual.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? All right, well, thank you, Mr. Langworthy. We are being efficient today. We'll move to item number 3, Board of Regents Annual Planning Process, and we'll turn this over to Executive Director and Corporate Secretary Brian Steeves.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. And now that we'll turn it over to me, our efficiency will probably go down.
Terribly.
All right. So this item is on the committee's agenda, both as a refresher for regents who are continuing, and then as an orientation for the quarter of the board that is brand new. I
believe that's a third.
A third. I'm sorry. I'm not good at math. So the annual planning process is something that we're just winding up the past year of that planning process and just engaging in the start of the next cycle. And it really is intended to guide development of your agendas throughout the year and ensure that you have the kind of impactful meetings that you want to have so that you're engaging in topics that are of concern to you, that are in alignment with the administration and the objectives that you've mutually agreed on and are trying to advance. It also will touch on some of the other activities that you'll do, some of the outreach and maybe campus visits or other things that you'll do. So we try and plan in the most comprehensive way we can to be in alignment with the things that you care about and are trying to advance in the organization. We do planning at 3 levels. First and foremost, we develop board priorities, and well, I should say you develop board priorities, and you do that in consultation or in collaboration with the president. And that really becomes the primary objective of your annual retreat in the summer. And those priorities then are used to guide both the president's work plan as well as your own planning efforts, both at the board level and at your committee levels. The board planning calendar grows out of that, and that is a document that simply lays out the 8 meetings that the board has each year, and it outlines some of the major topics that will be coming to the board. It outlines when committees will meet. It touches on things like, in some years you've had meetings at other campuses, and then you have certain meetings here in the Twin Cities, and in some years you've had visits to other campuses. It outlines those things. So it outlines a whole variety of ways that you will engage in your work throughout the year. And then below that are committee work plans, and those are also then intended to align with your priorities and advance those priorities. For instance, one of the things that was identified both by the board and we received input from FCC leadership on was that the board hadn't been engaging in and learning about and understanding graduate and professional education. And we've been doing a lot of things and a lot of focus on undergraduate education and not much on the graduate and professional side. This year you've seen then a long conversation arc about graduate and professional education that happened in the Mission Fulfillment Committee in order to deepen your understanding of that so that when you engage in conversations about the future of graduate and professional education, you have a firm foundation on which you can draw from. That's the kind of work that happens in committee work planning and rolls up to support these board priorities that have been outlined. We also seek to then use those plans and be thoughtful in developing those plans to balance the agendas that the board has. And we say, this is kind of a shorthand way, but we try to educate, engage, and act. So these are the major things that you do. If you look at your agendas and think about each of the items on there, there are items there that are intended to give you information, to simply help you better understand the university. Those are items that educate. There are items that seek to engage you in drawing out your opinions. This is when I often talk about the 4 questions framework, where the board and in its governance space is trying to identify where are we going, or who's responsible for getting there, or how do we measure progress. Those are items where you need to be engaged in. You're not a recipient of information, you are co-creating something with the administration for the future. Those are tougher ones because, to be honest, everybody is much more comfortable in educate space. And that's both the administration and you. Everybody is more comfortable in that space because it's just so much easier than trying to get into this next bucket, which is offering ideas and trying to find a path that navigates between differing opinions. But those are items that we try to craft and build into your agendas as well. And the work planning is really fundamental in trying to identify which areas are most important for your diverse experiences to be brought to bear on different topics at the university. And then finally, action items, and those are pretty self-explanatory. There are some items that are on your agenda because they're either being reviewed or they're being voted on, and that's their purpose there, because you have reserved certain authorities to yourself, and you then need to take action on those items. So just a couple discussion questions. We did not include in your docket samples of all of these plans, and you will see some of this as we start to move through the summer and we start to do this planning work. You'll start to see drafts of these items and opportunities for feedback and input. And so we didn't think it was important to put all of those samples in the docket right now. But one of the things that I guess a couple of questions that we have that would be helpful as we begin this process is how well have the agendas balanced across these objectives of educate, engage, and act? And does this notion of topic arcs, where we take something like a graduate and professional education and stretch it across 2, 3, 4 meetings and have bites of it across meetings, or, for instance, the operating budget series that we've been doing for the past few years in finance and operations, where we start basically in October, and we have 3, 4, 5 touches before you get to the point of the budget. And I know that the newer regents are at a little disadvantage to answer these questions, but I welcome any kind of feedback, because this is really what will help shape and guide the kinds of work plans that we're able to put together for the board.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. And by way of a little bit of background, for the noble third that's come in and joined us recently, when, my understanding, I don't mean to put words in the chair or vice chair's mouths here, but when the committee structure was realigned to create the Governance and Policy Committee, it was very much the sharpening the saw committee. We tend to focus, it seems, over time, we've been more in the educate and engage part of the conversation, which really then feeds into what the two, Fire for Effect committees of finance and mission fulfillment. And so just that little bit of background. So we've had a lot of conversations, not as much action on this committee, but really giving us a chance to take a step back and outside of the heat of the moment of a discussion about a certain policy, talk about how we try to engage in this governance space. And so with that, I would open it up for questions or comments. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. You didn't, I think you did a nice job of putting some words in our mouths there. I would go back to just the newness of the committee structure as well. I mean, this has been a work in progress since 2 years ago in July when we first came up with it, and throughout those 2 years, I have informally and formally, Ken as well at times, polled the board as to how they're working. So I think it's hard to separate the new structure from the questions that Mr. Steves is asking. So I think, form and substance matter here, and I don't have any ownership in any of it, but we keep trying to evolve, as you say, Regent Rocha, to sharpen the saw. And so without offering comments on the structure that we landed on, I would offer a comment that the usefulness of input around substantive topics is invaluable to board leadership. And whether that comes from the FCC and in Mr. Steves' example of graduate education, or whether that comes from members of this board in the time between now and our retreat, and in the time from the retreat forward to the point when the committees get their substantive, work plans done, just be engaged and be honest about the topics, and, be very forthright and talk to board leadership about what issues you think are missing, because I can just tell you from a very recent experience, it's super helpful. So I like big topic arcs, but I think they can be very consuming too. And I think chairs of the committees have to be ready to take a hiatus in an arc as they go forward if topics of great interest and topical or chronological imperativeness arise. And as we closed out yesterday, and I of course didn't chair mission fulfillment, but you realize the breadth of what Vice Provost Lanyon was bringing here over time. It's a lot of material, and I think that probably bounds one end of the scope that you'd ever want to tackle in a topic arc, because it's a lot. But I like it. I like it when I hear from regents who say, "Man, I'd really love to know more about that," or when we hear from an external stakeholder or an internal one that, "Wow, you people don't spend enough time on that." So I don't know if that's helpful, but the input's very, very critical.
Mr. Steves, before you respond, Regent Powell, do you want to speak to this point?
Different point.
Okay, Mr. Steves.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just some of your comments sparked a couple of thoughts that I think are maybe valuable to this conversation. And that is that as we put work plans together, be really, really mindful of issues that maybe feel important but aren't strategic or priorities that relate to all of what you're trying to advance. Because a lot of times what happens is your committee meetings, they feel like they're a bit overflowing. There's so many topics, there's so many things that we are trying to pack into them. And largely that's because it's kind of the buffet line effect. I mean, you're going through with the plate and everybody is like loading up, and by the end you think, oh my gosh, I've got more here than I maybe can eat. And if we can impose a little discipline on the front end when we're planning to say that, yep, that's a great topic, but maybe that's a topic we can simply ask for a memo from the administration on, and we don't need to have a full agenda topic on that. We can then free up those meetings a bit so that you get more substance and a little breathing room around other topics. The other thing I would say is I appreciate the topic of the committee structure coming up, and that's one where we always welcome feedback about that. The board did engage in a very comprehensive rewrite of its policies to implement these new committees, and so I would caution against abandoning it too quickly. But I would say that the feedback I hear is not about the committee structure. What I hear feedback about is, wow, that's a really long day, or wow, I'm really tired at the end of that day. We can do some other things to make that day feel less long or less tiring. But that's not about committee structure. That's about how the day is put together. So I would just offer those two things up.
Thank you, Mr. Steves. Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. So in this, I think I have a couple of comments. And the first one does build off of Mr. Steve's what he just commented on, and that has to do with the three levels of planning and the board priorities. I think that the planning construct is very good. The conversation on priorities and specifically priorities, around which the president and the board are completely aligned, that is a critical conversation and a conversation that has to continue throughout the year, and it becomes the test really for the agenda. And so, for instance, topic arcs, I think, are a terrific idea because this is a big, complicated place and there's dense material. But to the degree that we invest time in those topic arcs, as a board, I think we need to feel that this is well spent because it aligns, it's right on top of a strategic priority, and so I guess just a commentary on that. The other comment, maybe this is more of a question. It has to do with balancing the agendas, educate, engage, act. Maybe this is a little bit for the new members, but for all of us, it just seems to me that we are educated within the four walls of this room, when we meet, but much, if not most of what we learn on our own, through individual initiative and by just pursuing one-on-one meetings and visits, and and this is a deep, there's a lot going on, and we all have different interests and things that we're drawn towards, and so I guess I don't know whether that needs to be captured here, but I think the education process is more fulsome, than is indicated here. And actually, if you really want to know what's going on here, you're going to have to. It requires, I think, quite a bit of individual initiative, and that's encouraged.
Director Steves?
No comments.
Thank you. Further questions? Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Stepping back a little bit on the formation of the committee, I had some misgivings about it initially 2 years ago as to what exactly we were going to drive it, but this has been a success. Just this conversation in the last 15 minutes about process and planning is, every other committee drives right into substance and issues and projects and resolutions and numbers, and this is really our only chance to talk about how we go about our business. At the end of the day, the how is as much critical as the what. I do support it. Going to the point of, we'll talk about this at the retreat. I think Thursday days are too long. Maybe Regent Mayeron will lead us into calisthenics. I know you're out walking during that hour. Got to pick us up, but we'll talk about that. The retreat is sort of the one bite at the apple, the summer retreat, where we have to get those priorities identified. And this year is particularly important. And, all the flow that comes out of that in terms of the committee, well, the structure of the committees and the work plans and the priorities, that day and a half is just really where we make or break the work of the year, because it's too hard to turn the ship during the year mid-course. And I know the staff puts a lot of work in it, they always have, but this year particularly is going to be an important retreat.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Further questions or commentary? Seeing none, I'll just make a comment with respect to the committee structure, which again, I think does flow from this. Having observed 3 different structures, I think that there are tremendous strengths in the way we've operated the last couple of years. Obviously, the one challenge when you don't have the more smaller committees, some of the detail, I think, is harder to grasp, and that goes to the issue of the long Thursdays and so on. But with a board of 12 people, it strikes me that the committee of the whole structure on these major topics outside of your audit and litigation and those committees, which are standing committees of a smaller number, I think it's really helped for us to have a common understanding, particularly when we talk in the governance area, that we are engaging in this conversation. It's not hearing a report of the other 6 members, and so I'm very appreciative of the success that we have seen in this model. But of course, yeah, it is exhausting, I think, at times at the end of Thursday, and so. Which has really been a challenge for the vice chair of governance and myself, because everybody's so mellow on Friday morning, just recovering from the day before, that it takes a while for us to get the robust conversation going. So, more questions or comments on item 3? If not, we'll move to the last item on the agenda, which is the update on potential changes to Board of Regents policy, Code of Ethics for members of the Board of Regents. I will turn that back to Director Steves.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll point back to Mr. Langworthy previously talked a little bit about the comprehensive review cycle for board policies, and that is why this policy is before you. The Code of Ethics for members of the Board of Regents was up in this current year in the policy plan for a comprehensive review, and this committee began that process, began that undertaking of comprehensively reviewing this. This policy, perhaps uniquely, has the because of the nature of this policy, it's unique in that this committee really has to engage in the work of doing this policy, because ultimately this is how this governing body is developing rules of the road for itself. So the Code of Ethics for members of the board came previously for this committee to review it and discuss it in October and December. We've had other policies, and one was noted earlier, the Board Operations and Agenda Guidelines, that I think ended up having 6 conversations before the committee ultimately adopted it. So we have plenty of runway here yet, but in those 2 months, in those 2 conversations, a number of topics were addressed, and there was some consensus on some areas, and then there were some areas that either there wasn't consensus yet, or the committee hasn't really taken up and talked about in a thorough way. And so there's some just additional feedback that's needed. So what we wanted to do today is that we wanted to outline those areas that we believe there is some consensus around, and then give you a roadmap of those areas where there is some additional conversation needed. And then walk through those areas and tee up some questions related to them. We're thinking that this conversation today can certainly give some of that input. We were also contemplating the possibility of putting those questions together just in a little email survey and sending it around, because you may have comments that you'd want to share, but you won't be able to get your comments in today on every one of the questions. And so we thought that might be an effective way to gather everyone's input as well on these topics. So if the group is amenable to that, we'll do that after this meeting as well. All right, first I'll outline areas of consensus. The committee seemed to be comfortable with adding specific language defining fiduciary duties, such as the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. These are very common in the nonprofit world, and and something that we have good language around. It's just that your current policy does not speak to these. It's not there. And so it's an area where there seemed to be some support for adding that in. Secondly, there was consensus that the current conflict of interest process and financial disclosure requirements are pretty sound, and that we should continue that, having that language in place. There's language around the paramount interest that your work with the university is of paramount interest, and it's kind of a duty of loyalty paragraph, and that coupled with some text around the public trust that you uphold and maintain, those were sections that the committee seemed to be supportive of. Current expense reimbursement provisions seemed to be, there was comfort with that. There was comfort with merging policy language related to both the Code of Ethics and this other policy that you have called Responsibilities of the Board and Individual Regents, bringing those together into one umbrella policy. And then kind of the last bullet point as well, then taking another piece from a different policy around gifts received and given by regents and university officials, bringing the regents part out of there and bringing it into this policy. Now that all sounds complicated, but really what it would do is, and you maybe even retitle this, not a code of ethics, but more of a code of conduct, it would bring your code of ethics and conflict provisions, your duties and responsibilities that you've outlined both as a board and individuals, and some rules that you have around gifts received and given, all into one policy instead of having those divided across 3 policies. And so we like that for a variety of reasons, but perhaps most of which, it's just easier for you to go to one policy and understand all of the things related to your service on this board, versus trying to know that, oh, I've got to go over here in this one provision in this policy, and then if I want something, want to know about something else, I have to go to this policy, and the financial disclosures are in this policy. It's very confusing and more difficult for you to navigate. And so we think consolidating it could actually just make it much easier and more understandable. Areas that we're continuing, that we need some continuing conversation and feedback and input on. Communication with external groups and the media. There are 2 sentences in one of the policies related to who speaks for the board and who speaks for the university, and those have been areas where there's been different interpretations. I mean, frankly, they're not very specific in what they mean, and so they mean different things to different people. And so this is one where there probably could be some additional conversation to figure out where is this group comfortable landing in terms of having policy around this. The second is perhaps defining a formal process for disputes, or using Robert's Rules of Order, which has lots of processes around things. It's just that we haven't tended to rely on Robert's Rules for some of those adjudication or kind of dispute settlement rules before. Third is whether remedies for breaches of the Code of Ethics are needed. Right now, there are not remedies that are spelled out in policy. And so I know we've gotten some feedback that there should be, and I think we yet at this point don't know exactly what that should look like, or how this group wishes to pull that together, and if you desire to even have it. Next is whether to address regent requests for information and expectations for the administration when responding to those requests. There are universities, we have a couple of examples, Texas, Nebraska, that have outlined in their policies some guidelines around this kind of information requests. We don't have any provisions right now, and this group would need to give us some guidance as to whether we should or should not. Additional conflict of interest provisions related to a regent's family member, when a regent's family member is a university employee. I'm sorry, and I skipped over one. Guidance for how regents participate in partisan political activity. There is a provision right now in policy, and whether that stays the same or is modified in some way is an open question. This conflict around family member employment is one. And then the structure of the Code of Ethics is another one. We've gotten some feedback that it would be helpful to have a formal policy along with a set of guidelines. Right now, all of these materials or all of these requirements are in board policy. So I know it's a long list of potential items, but we'll touch on each one of them. I kind of touched on these as I walked through them, but I'll outline the question. Should additional guidance be added regarding communication by Regents to external groups and the media? Right now, it's pretty slim and it's open to interpretation. And so the question is, should there be additional guidance? And if so, what might that look like? Balancing, obviously, the fact that Regents have an ability to express their own views on various topics. So that's an open item. Should the Code of Ethics include remedies for breaches? As I mentioned earlier, Robert's Rules has some provisions related to this, but whether those are something you want to rely on or whether you want to have your own set of procedures would be an open question. I've already touched on this one. Partisan political activity. Right now, current policy says that if a regent officially announces candidacy for a partisan elective office, they shall resign from the Board of Regents. There's a couple of issues with this, and one of which we were just talking about is there isn't actually such a thing as a partisan elective office. There are elective offices, and people seek partisan endorsements for them, but there isn't such a thing. But so anyway, this would be a question of should there be language around or requirements related to when a regent runs for elective office and whether they seek a partisan endorsement for that and what impact that might have on their service on the board. This one relates to conflicts related to regents' family members and employment of those family members. This is an area where I don't believe current policy has it's a gap, basically. It talks about family members who do business with the university, but it doesn't talk about family members who maybe are employed by the university. And then this one as well, so the structure of it. Right now, all of these provisions are in board policy. There's also been some suggestion that at least some of them, or maybe a significant portion of them, might be moved over to something called board guidelines. Board guidelines is something that's been used in some cases for the kinds of provisions that are just more technical in nature that maybe you don't want to write into board policy. So we do have some examples. Right now, for instance, the board has directed our office to maintain guidelines related to expense reimbursements for regents, or we have ticket guidelines and processes related to complimentary tickets that regents receive. We have guidelines related to the comprehensive policy review process. We have guidelines related to the presidential performance review and compensation setting. All of those are areas where the board has directed that guidelines be established and maintained, but the board isn't engaged in the details of those guidelines. So those are all the questions. I know that's a lot to lay out, but we welcome feedback today. And like I said, if the group is open to it, we will send around these questions in a little survey and gather feedback that way too.
Thank you, Director Steves. And before we open the floor to questions and commentary, I think I know the answer to this. Does anybody object to receiving an email seeking your feedback on any topic that we don't resolve in the next conversation? Seeing no objections, Director Steves, I think that would be an appropriate vehicle for getting that feedback. I will turn to Regent Mayron.
Mr. Steves, thank you for this presentation. And what I'm struck by as a new member is how comprehensive the work is that's ongoing and has been done and is currently under consideration. And I think that you have pretty much covered the waterfront in terms of issues that this board needs to grapple with in terms of what constitutes good governance for ourselves. My suggestion would be, given the time here, which is it's 10 to 9, and I know we have a full agenda for the morning, that I really do think this is such an important topic that really does deserve a robust discussion among all of us, that whether it be part of the annual retreat that's coming up or a more lengthy meeting or special meeting to address and grapple with these issues and have a discussion among each other on particularly the open items of discussion, because I know there's going to be differences of opinions, and I think being able to share those, not in the heat of the moment, but in a general way about how we would like to conduct ourselves, would be inure to everybody's benefit. So I'd like to suggest that rather than taking the time of trying to give feedback at this point, that we really set aside an adequate amount of time to delve into these open items of discussion, and sooner rather than later. And I welcome the conversation with all of my colleagues as we walk through what's appropriate governance of ourselves vis-a-vis all the other stakeholders that are interested in the university.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Director Steves, I would say that those are very apt comments. Any one of the open questions could consume far more than what we have left on this committee's schedule here. So I would ask Director Steves if you've got a response to that.
Mr. Chair, I agree. I think that's helpful, and perhaps one of the ways, and maybe this can all fit together, is that if we were able to gather some initial feedback from folks via this little survey or something of that nature, we would be able to know which of these issues maybe there's more alignment on and which ones there's greater gaps, and then we can focus our conversations around those areas where there seems to be a greater gap, so that you can try and build some consensus.
And just as a follow-up, I would encourage us to do this sooner rather than later, because every one of these open items of discussions really guides our conduct on starting tomorrow, starting today, as we get inquiries. So the sooner we can come to an understanding on these open areas, I think would be so helpful to all of us.
Thank you. Regent Powell.
Thanks, Chair Rocha. Very much agree with Regent Mayron's comments, but wanted to switch to just a different and separate issue, and it has to do with a point that we've already resolved, which is adding language defining the fiduciary duties of care, loyalty, and obedience. I just want to comment that is a crucial bit of language. And that I don't know how we missed it, we did, but we've added it back. And I think it might be worth, at a future but soon meeting, to have a bit of a discussion on what that actually means, to the degree that we haven't had it, before. And it's not, I think it's more than we have it now. It's in the, and let's check the box. I think we need to talk. And I know that in other boards that I've been on, both nonprofit and public company, I mean, that duty of care, provision often is the starting point for governance conversations, and just reminding directors of their responsibilities around here. So it's just good that we fixed it. We probably need to educate ourselves a bit on what it actually means.
Thank you, Regent Powell. Director Steves, did you get what you need there? Okay, we'll move to Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Rocha. First of all, echoing what Regent Mayron said, really a nice job by the committee leadership and your team, Mr. Steves, of putting this in a framework that we can actually tackle it. This is the first time, and I've bumped into these issues throughout my time in leadership and before that, and this feels like there's a framework here that we can get at it. So thank you. That's half the battle, and I think I agree with Regent Mayron that there's too much here, and Regent Rocha said, Chair Rocha said this as well. Probably we go into any of these avenues, we'll still be here at 10:30. But I would throw out just two observations. One is, you all know how I feel about remedies, that I have resisted the urge to get into this until we get an answer to remedies, but the policy versus guidelines slide that's in front of us might provide some answers there. If we're going to have a policy, my view would be we better have a remedy, or at least a process to maybe consider a remedy. And if we can't get a remedy or we don't want one, perhaps that's guideline material then. I just as a way to think about that, and my thinking on this is constantly evolving. And then on the communications topic, and I don't want to crack this open in its substance, but I want you all to appreciate how wholly unsatisfactory it is to be in leadership and have regents interpreting some of those provisions differently. So some interpret it, and they want to talk to external parties, some don't want others, and without more of a roadmap here and a set of guidelines and framework, you feel helpless. And it's just no matter which side is looking for outcomes there and answers. So I don't want to get into the substance of that. I just want to tell incoming leadership that will get to you too. And I really think that's one that needs some clarity. Of course, I spent the bulk of my professional career leading communications for a publicly traded private corporation, so I have my views, but I just think that one really warrants attention. And the point I'd bring up, of course, we all know this little card and what it says, but going into my 9th year on the board, I learned as we worked through communication issues that beneath the level of this policy or guideline, whichever it is, the board office actually had a protocol I was unaware of related to, and I'm not picking on the board office now, but a protocol lying below the policy that came about in, I think Regent Beeson would remember this, I should too, that actually directs the media to individual members of the board when the media calls, which is wholly inconsistent with the policy. So that came about because some regents were concerned that chairs, 7, 8 years ago were exerting too much control. I didn't even know it existed. So as we scrape away layer after layer, there's more to some of this stuff that meets the eye. And again, I don't bring it up to dig into it now. I just want to let you know how this chair has wrestled with the issue. And I think we do the board a great favor and leadership a great favor to make some progress in defining how we want to do this. But again, awesome job of getting us a framework around which we can start to go there.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Got a few folks lined up. Regent Beeson, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When the chair and I really cracked open this issue, we were hoping to make more progress, I think, than we did. But we did, at the end of the day, create a framework. We've raised questions, and I think it's ready for some additional work. I agree with all the comments that my colleagues have made. I think there are probably 90% of the issues are resolvable and that we can get complete consensus on. There's just some old language that's irrelevant to today's world. I think we can work through those. So my recommendation would be that the staff, along with the chair and I, just kind of grind through the 90% and identify this other, what's maybe 2 or 3 topics. So it's going to be disputes resolutions is one issue, who speaks to the board, maybe one other. And I think we need to make it an efficient use of our time at the board when we deal with this and really work on those harder issues, whether it's the retreat or in September or at this committee meeting or whatever you decide how you want to proceed. But we can boil it down to those couple of tougher issues and make a decision and memorialize it. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. I think that's a good summation of what, where we were heading with this, and the board office has done an amazing job of continuing to help distill these conversations. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Chair Rocha and Director Steves. Just to comment on what Regent Beeson was saying, I definitely agree that I think after we give that feedback via email, some drafts can be made, and then we can look at it from there. My comments, I know we're supposed to be focusing on the ones that aren't in consensus, but I have a couple comments with the paragraph above. In terms of the fiduciary duty of care, although not explicitly said, I think the policy responsibilities of the board and individual regents deals with that and enumerates a lot of the same things, even though not explicitly. And then in terms of perhaps combining the code of ethics policy and the responsibilities policy, though I have no issue with that being done, I don't think there would be an issue. I do see why they're separate. I interpret one as your responsibilities as a board member, and then how you go about that. And in looking at them, I see the distinctions, and in just the past month, I've been looking back to the responsibilities one frequently, because I think that's a really nice summation of what your duties and what you swore an oath to. And then the code of ethics can then give you the more specifics, almost not quite guidelines, but moving towards guidelines on how to go about those responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Her.
Okay, thank you, Chair Rocha and Director Steves, for a very thoughtful framework. I caution us on creating too many rules. We could have the most beautiful rules that we wordsmith so beautifully, but if we don't hold ourselves and act out upon those conducts, it's worthless. So to me, when I think about rules, coming from my background, being female, being minority, when I think of a lot of rules, my experience is that it's meant to constrict me. It's not meant to make me be at my best. So when we think about creating these rules for ourselves, think about how it will not control us, but that how it will allow us to be at our best and most effective. And if we go in with that mindset, then I don't doubt that we will create something that we can all implement and hold ourselves up to. So that's my caution when I think about too much rulemaking for our own conduct. It stresses me out in that, yes, we should know better, but there should be rules that allow us to be better. And that's how I want to frame this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Her. Further questions or comments? I'll just make a quick statement. Following Regent Her, that's a very important point. And when I think about policy versus guidelines, and this is sort of a fixed perspective over a long period of time for me, as was explained many years ago, is that Regents policy is the university's law. And so one of the questions, one of the challenges when we put something in policy, if it's not enforceable, and this goes off of Regent McMillan's apt comments a moment ago, then it's not really a policy, it's more of a guideline, a suggestion. This is how we would like to interact. But we also have the issue of difference of opinion. And do you take a more restrictive perspective in trying to seek remedies to constrict behavior, or do we allow those of us elected to serve in this capacity to exercise our judgment? It's the age-old question when you elect a legislator. Are you electing somebody to represent you, or are you electing someone to exercise their best judgment? Well, I think we all would agree that at times it's one and at times it's another. And so that is something just to consider as we go forward in really defining what are things that can be enforced and are appropriately within a policy, and then which would be guidelines that talk about what we all believe in this current moment in time, and of course it changes through history, as to how we best interact, and to what extent does more communication actually help address some of these issues as opposed to taking some sort of punitive action and so on. So wonderful conversation, thank you. Look forward to the getting into the more specifics of it. I think Regent Beeson is right. We're down to these handful, but I think we can probably even narrow what those issues actually are even more narrowly. I'll turn to Regent Kenyanya before shutting this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, as you were speaking and referring to what Regent McMillan was talking about in terms of interpretation, it got me thinking perhaps, and maybe this is my lack of understanding, but a clarification on then whose responsibility it is to interpret what you call the law. You look at the government, we have the legislature to make them, the executive branch to enforce them, and then the judicial to interpret them. And I know the Code of Ethics, it talks about disputes, but that's specifically to the conflict of interest. But in general, who do we look to interpret
Director Steves.
Mr. Chair, this body governs itself, and this body has to interpret. And so in disputes related to a conflict of interest, ultimately the board decides if there is a conflict in a situation. And so there is no entity above this group or outside this group that will adjudicate these kinds of questions. And that's why it's really important that there be buy-in and consensus among this group, that you understand and know and agree with the kinds of guidelines you want to have for yourselves, for your conduct.
Regent Kenyanya, you want to follow? I've got a thought on that as well, but go ahead, Regent Kenyanya.
I was just going to say that perhaps that was kind of obvious. I think I was more curious about if there's a procedure or guidelines around that interpretation.
Regent Kenyanya, I probably can respond. That's what this conversation's about, is identifying, how do we want to address those issues as they come. I would modify what Director Steve said just a little bit. Our appointment our election to this board is subject to the state constitution, and there are other rules related to holding public office that we can somewhat assume would apply to our holding of this office. The question is, what could we enforce? Could we, could 11 of us vote to expel a member because they vote wrong on the president's budget next week? I mean, do we have the authority to do that versus a circumstance where there's a clear violation of commonly understood ethics, such as somebody accepted payment in order to vote a certain way on a matter before this board, in which case there would be a whole different set of law that would apply. So this is really what we're trying to navigate. So you've got your finger on the pulse of the issue. So we'll continue to have that conversation. And certainly the board office, these are our subject matter experts, and I would say kind of world class at this point, considering how much time we've spent on this. And so if you want to have that conversation really with any of your colleagues or with the board office, that would be appropriate before we move into a conversation at a retreat.
Thank you.
I would turn over to Regent Powell.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this topic? Seeing none, I will just reassert my expression of gratitude to the Vice Chair Beeson for his remarkable effort and work on this committee. Thank you again. Thank you to the board office and staff for the support throughout this past cycle. And seeing no other business before the board and no other questions or comments, we are adjourned.
So